This morning, we gathered to hear the perspectives of educators in our college. They will share insights, strategies, provocations for centering healing, joy, and liberation in our teaching, learning, and working environments, and continue to remind us about our responsibility as educators. Thank you to the panelists for giving of your time and sharing with us today. And Dana, thank you for moderating this session. I will now turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Higgins. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for the closing panel of this year's conference titled, Where Do We Go From Here? Exploring the Role and Responsibility of Education for Collective Healing and Advocacy in Challenging Times. I hope you have all enjoyed the concurrent sessions and you're feeling reflective and enlightened coming into this closing panel. My name is Dana Barnhart. I use she, her pronouns. I am currently a staff member within the Department of Kinesiology, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve as today's moderator. As Dr. Higgins just mentioned, in this closing panel, educators from departments across the Mary Frances Early College of Education will share insights, strategies, and provocations for centering healing, joy, and liberation in our teaching, learning, and working environments. In the context of the recent attack on the Capitol, the COVID-19 pandemic, anti-Black and anti-Asian violence, the 2020 presidential election, and rampant wildfires in the American West, we wonder, what is the responsibility of educational institutions to proactively respond to these harms? And how might these challenges also present an opening for creative ways to learn together, support one another, and imagine how else we might think and do education? The panelists present today will reflect on possible ways forward for imagining education and the helping professions as sites for critical praxis, collective healing, and courageous conversations. Before we get started, I would like to thank the Mary Frances Early College of Education's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for coordinating this event. And of course, I'd like to introduce our wonderful panelists here today. First up, we have Dr. Richard Blissett. Dr. Blissett is an assistant professor of education policy and quantitative methods. His current research program focuses on attitudes towards race conscious and other forms of justice-oriented policy, including how these beliefs are formed and the spaces in which these beliefs are translated into action. Works in this area has included research on democratic structures and education governance, particularly school boards, the use of information in people's policy opinion formation, and anti-racism activism and social movements in education. He has also actively participated in advocacy and professional service, including many anti-racism and diversity initiatives, as well as efforts to combat institutional homophobia throughout his academic career, and received the Peabody Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Leadership Award during his time in graduate school. Thank you for being here, Dr. Blissett. Next up, we have Dr. Kevin Burke. Dr. Kevin Burke is an associate professor in the Department of Language and Literacy Education at the University of Georgia. He conducts community-based research which focuses on the need for a full accounting of the many failures that emerge from youth participatory action methodologies. His work in curriculum theorizing sits at the intersection of queer, religious, and theological discourses. His most recent book with Ruth Harmon was published in Sonia Nieto's Language, Culture, and Teaching series and is entitled Culturally Sustaining Systemic Functional Linguistics Praxis, Embodied Inquiry with Multilingual Youth. Thank you for being here, Dr. Burke. Next up, we have Dr. Cheryl Field-Smith. Prior to earning her doctorate from Emory University in 2004, Dr. Field-Smith served as an elementary school teacher in Bridgeport, Stamford, and Norwalk, Connecticut. During her tenure as a teacher, she taught in 2 magnet schools, both of which employed the Bank Street model, which emphasizes child-centered, hands-on experiential learning through thematic social studies-based integrated instruction. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Field-Smith. And last but not least, we have Dr. Sakara Fisher. Dr. Sakara Fisher received her doctoral training in school psychology at Michigan State University with an emphasis on working with culturally diverse populations. She completed her pre-doctoral internship in New Orleans, Louisiana, focusing on response to intervention within urban school systems. After the completion of her degree, she served for 3 years as a school psychologist at an urban charter school in Washington, D.C. Dr. Fisher's research focuses on improving life outcomes for diverse populations. This manifests itself in 2 lines of research. The first involves examining models of risk and resilience related to mental health and substance use for African American adolescents. The second line of research focuses on the implementation of expanded school mental health services and substance use preventive interventions in low-income minority serving schools. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Fisher. Before we dive into today's questions, I would like to encourage all of our attendees to record their own questions for the panelists within the Zoom Q&A feature. We have dedicated some time to address these questions toward the end of our discussion. So I think it's time for me to stop talking and let's hear from the panelists. Let's dive right in. You guys ready? All right, the first question for you today. The past year has been full of challenges and uncertainties, from the global pandemic and associated anti-Asian sentiment to family separations at the border and intensified anti-Black violence. How would you describe the biggest challenges facing education right now? What are you hearing from your students, caregivers, teachers, and community members about the challenges and needs? And we can start with Dr. Blissett.
Sure. Can everyone hear me all right? Yeah, so I mean, I think first there are the particularly acute issues, the things that people are feeling and talking about, and the things that particularly feel kind of in your face, ranging from the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on Black and Brown communities and the existential fear experienced by, you know, Asian students, Black students, Latina students, current legislation in Georgia trying to like restrict rights for transgender youth. And so there are all these like current things that are going on that feel particularly acute. But I think when we talk about, you know, what's the biggest problem that at least I'm kind of observing, at least in my circles, is that we don't have a, we're starting to see more that we don't really have a political system that supports justice as core work, which includes a lot of things. It includes, you know, not a lot of attention or care for justice as a phenomenon to monitor. There aren't really any goals that people are shooting for within the political system. There's a pretty strong coalition of people that are consistently in opposition to having a justice focus, right? And a political party that has consistently kind of opposed that. And then also just little willingness to put in the work to move justice forward, which is all to say that, you know, all these various things are not new for people who have been involved in the work, and certainly the other panelists have been involved in other parts of this as well. You know, a lot of this work has been going on for a while, but we don't have a system to support, you know, the many good kind of ideas and paths forward that we have, you know, across the country. You know, we have 14,000 or more school districts, and school districts across the country this week and next are probably going to have a moment of silence at the beginning of their board meetings to acknowledge the things that have happened over the past couple of weeks. But then when you ask, well, what are you going to do kind of in your policy making, there's not going to be a lot there. And so when I think about what the biggest issues are, they're the things that are obviously the acute issues, but then there's also, I think, what we're starting to be more aware of is a system that isn't helping us kind of move forward.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Blissett. Dr. Burke, can you add your perspective?
Yeah, and thank you. That the systems change analysis stuff is stuff that I'll talk a little bit about later, and is hugely vital. And so I'm grateful for Dr. Blissett bringing that up. I often, when I teach, I use this old Simpsons clip, and it's Homer calling alcohol the cause of and solution to all life's problems, and I use it to think about the way in which we have societally made schools the cause of and solution to all of life's problems, in large part because of retrenchment in the welfare state. The schools are what we have left as a unifying institution, but essentially the provider of all of the provisions that might otherwise be distributed in a robust welfare state. And so schools are just asked to do too much, and then when they fail, and this is, you know, David Library's work and lots of different people's work, they're scapegoated for that failure that's baked into the system. And so I'm really worried most recently about in the moves to reopen, concerns over learning loss and the framing of learning loss, particularly in the ways in which, and these are critiques that are emerging from Jack Schneider, but also from David Kirkland and Rich Milliner, and they emerge from Gloria Ladson-Billings' work on the educational debt. And the idea is like, we're living in the midst of a massive crisis, so learning loss might be important, but the framing of loss there misses all of the ways in which people are proving their resilience in the midst of death and destruction. And so that then sets up schools as inherently having failed regardless. Like something was lost, and certainly things were lost, but things were gained as well. And so what have we learned over this process as opposed to what we've lost? So that worries me immensely as we move forward into the next year.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burke, for sharing. Dr. Fisher, can you add to the question?
Yeah, so I think my perspective is really more at the individual student level. While I feel like systems are obviously a big part of this, thinking about, what am I hearing from students or caregivers or teachers? And really it's the need to feel heard and supported. And these pandemics are really only bringing the things that we already know have been existing to light, and they're exacerbating already existing disparities. So these disparities that Dr. Burke is talking about, as he knows, existed right before this COVID-19 pandemic, but it's only showing that it's exacerbating what was happening before. And so what we really need to think about is how do we really think about, one, providing support for those students and families. Particularly my work is around thinking about how do you connect families and kids to mental health services? How do you provide those supports? And we know those most impacted by this pandemic are less likely to be able to access those services. So it's really important that we try to put things in place for that. But also I think at a systemic level, it's really important for us to think about being adaptive at the school level. We can't go back into schools as we do, thinking about our practice the way that we thought about our practice before we left, before the pandemic. We have to think about broader issues around social justice and equity. We have to be flexible around what our roles were before the pandemic, and now be more flexible around what that role may look like when we come back to schools, to be able to provide the supports that kids and teachers and families need.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fisher. And a lot of what you just said kind of resonated with the panel from yesterday with some of the local students from Clark County. So thank you so much for sharing. And Dr. Field-Smith, would you like to add as well?
Yes, I would. For me, I share Dr. Burke's concern about the discourse regarding the so-called learning loss. My fear is that it'll push educational leaders, school leaders to continue down the path of only focusing on the academics and defining it in terms of test scores and such. What I've heard anecdotally and now beginning to see, NPR just did a talk on this recently, that there are some children who have been able to thrive in the online environment. These are children of all types, but in particular, I'm interested in the Black and Brown children who have been able to thrive. Last night, I was talking to a colleague in North Carolina. There's a group of African-American families who did not homeschool their children. They were doing the virtual schooling, but they set up sort of a learning pod, if you will, to bring the children together to work on their schoolwork. And the kids are thriving. And they don't want to see an end to virtual schooling. This also resonates in my own family. My brother pays $50,000 a year per child. He has 2 children, attending full-time, online learning high schools that are run by Stanford University out in California. My brother lives in Connecticut. His daughter, my niece, graduated from this school last May, and now she's in school online and in college online. there is a thriving online market, and I think we need to look at some of the positives that have happened as a result of this virtual schooling. The last thing I want to say is the most latest report regarding homeschooling. My research area is homeschooling, so that's ever present on my mind. But between May of 2020 and up to August of 2020, homeschooling doubled in America. The most increase was seen in the Black community. 3.3% representation somewhere around spring 2020. That jumped to 16.1% of Black families homeschooling. I see it in an organization I co-founded, the Black Family Home Educators and Scholars Group. We have leaped well over 1,000 in our membership. It says a lot that families were able to do this online shift and then shift to traditional schooling, and they're using online methods. So I think we need to look at what's working with online methods and stop bashing it in some ways.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fieldsmith. That was a very interesting statistic you just shared. Thank you. Moving on, let's start looking a little bit to the future with the next question. In the wake of these challenges, what opportunities do you envision to reshape how we think about and do education? What has the rupturing of the status quo taught us about the possibilities for a more just and equitable approach to education? Dr. Burke, would you like to start us off this time?
Yeah, so I'm going to be provincial here, and I'm going to talk about an organization that's dear to my heart. So the Deep Center down in Savannah is a community-based literacy center, deepcenter.org, check it out. That does really wonderful, initially creative writing work, and then social justice, social change work with youth in Savannah. Most recently thinking about systems change with the youth, and they have an action research team, and they also have this block by block program that over the course of the last 2 years has created with the teaching artists in that space and with the youth, the policy briefs for Savannah, Chatham County about what social change should look like for youth in the city. So the first one was about creating a sustainable community through mental health support. And the second one is about restorative justice in schools. And so DEEP has taken on lots of work with the youth and thinking about the juvenile justice system. But specifically the action research team, the kids, shouldn't call them kids, the youth, because they're in their later teenage years, this summer are going to be creating their own freedom school because of some of the research that they've done, and also the experiences that they had in organizing other research teams over the course of last year. And they decided that the environment that they had created together was valuable and loving. They call it village building, but also it was useful for thinking about how you create that momentum and system change among the youth throughout Savannah, Chatham County. So they'll start that Freedom School initiative this summer, and I imagine it will continue from there. So that gives me a great deal of hope, because DEEP is wonderful and the people who are there are great, but that model is replicable in other spaces, and it really doesn't take a ton of, I mean, it takes money, like we should have money, but it doesn't take a ton of resources compared to what other initiatives have looked like in the world. So I'm really excited about this Freedom School to see what's going to happen.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that information. Dr. Fisher.
Yeah, so I think thinking about schools as places and envisioning a future of education, for me, Dr. Burke is right. We ask schools to do a lot. And here I am, I'm going to propose and ask schools to do something else. But I'm not asking them to add something else to their plate, but to really rethink about how they are actually still doing things. We can't just think about the fact that we have all of these racially motivated events in this country, not think about the environments that are creating the folks that are carrying out these events. We have to think about having these kind of conversations that we're having right now, not just at the university level. I feel like oftentimes these conversations are reserved for those privileged enough to be able to get to a college or even, you know, a graduate level of education, but we really should be having these types of conversations and discussing some of these types of issues when ideas about other groups are forming. So this is even going down to elementary school, middle school, high school. So what do we think about, or how do we modify our social emotional learning curriculum to think about what it means to accept those who are different than ourselves? How do we also address, you know, minoritized students in schools who are dealing with acculturative stress, discrimination, and racism through our social emotional learning curricula in a way that allows everyone to be involved in these conversations. So I think for me, the future of education really revolves around adjusting our current sort of approaches to social emotional learning, to mental health, to positive behaviors or interventions in schools, to really also include a focus on, you know, racial equity and diversity and inclusion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fisher. Dr. Field-Smith, can you share with us?
Yes, absolutely. Building on what's already been said in many ways, I would think, based on what's going on with online learning, and even looking at what different districts are doing here in Georgia, we're starting to see a different type of hybrid schooling. So we're giving parents choice to stay online or to come face-to-face into the building. And what I heard, one district in particular, they've decided to dedicate a teacher to online learning. So they're in the building, but the parents who are choosing to keep their children at home have a teacher that can help them support that learning. And so parent and teacher are working together to teach. I think that's a wonderful opportunity for reimagining school choice, if you will. So you're still a public school student, you have a dedicated teacher, but it's unrealistic to imagine you being online all day. So there's some asynchronous time. And that's what I'm hearing from former students who are now teaching, that during that asynchronous time, children who weren't successful in the classroom are being successful at home because that autonomy, that independence, that ownership of their schooling, it's actually working for them. And I have to go back to my niece and nephew who go to this very expensive Stanford University run high school. When you ask them what's the difference in their schooling, that's what they say, that they're getting to do the work in a way that's freeing for them and customizable, if you will, that they get to choose when to do it, how to do it, you know. And I hope that all that's happened and what we're learning, that we will begin to do more liberated instruction with children, more child-centered instruction, giving them voice and choice in their schooling, whether it be through this new hybrid model of school choice or some other mechanism. But that's what I see as a possibility.
Thank you so much, Dr. Field-Smith. Dr. Blissett, would you like to share?
Sure. Yeah, I think there are two things that I've seen people be inspired by that I think can help identify ways forward. One has been talked about a couple of times, which is recognizing the power of youth and the power of young people throughout the pandemic and before, right? All the way going back to Eric Gardner and before. Young people have been a really powerful force in social change, both at the high school and college level. And I think I have witnessed in my interactions with school administrators and also like school board members and things like that, that there is a shift in how we think about young people's civic engagement. Now, certainly a lot of it is not particularly where we want it to be. And I don't know exactly kind of your work, Dr. Burke, but I imagine some of the concerns align with some of the stuff you've probably talked about. But for sure, I think there's an opportunity to kind of rethink the capacity of schools to work with youth to create a more justice-oriented democracy, right? To the extent that part of what we're seeing is this lack of engagement from the general public. Schools are a great place to start to think about where we can build that, right? And where there's already kind of some momentum around that, and think about how we can capitalize on that momentum to be able to create a broader community that is more consistently committed to justice work. And along with that, outside of the work that young people are doing, so are adults, right? So there are across the country a lot of organizations that have cropped up over the past 5-6 years that are doing really good work. And for that matter, even within organizations, organizations all over the place, ranging from hospitals to schools to colleges and universities, are starting initiatives where they haven't before. And yeah, sure, they're not all perfect, right? And some would argue some are even maybe counterproductive, right? But they've opened the door to create opportunities for individuals to figure out, what can I actually do? Because when I hear kind of the anxieties of our administrators and all of that, a lot of it is not really knowing what to do and feeling a little bit helpless, but recognizing, to the points that I think everyone has made, there are things happening, right? And there are things that people can plug into to learn, to contribute, and to kind of take the snowball down the hill to create an education system that is more consistently centering forward-moving justice work.
Thank you so much, Dr. Blissett. For the next question, let's kind of shift our thinking to your roles here as a faculty member. As faculty members, what questions are you now asking yourself that you weren't necessarily thinking about 1.5 years ago? Has anything changed in how you think about and practice your role as educators and researchers? And we can start with Dr. Fisher here.
Yeah, so I definitely think my perspective has changed. I have this internal working theory that I have no clue if it has any type of evidence base, because I have not been in this literature, but I feel like as you start, particularly as a person of color, as you start in this social justice work, I feel like, a lot of my effort was really focused on, we have to have these courageous conversations. We have to sort of, as they say in politics, reach across the aisle and, talk about these things. And as more of these events kept happening, and as I moved more and more into sort of my identity in this type of work, I started to shift my focus and become more adamant about the fact that, those conversations and that teaching and learning by the dominant group or white folks is not my responsibility. And so what my responsibility is to those who are affected by these events. And so now my research is really focused on, supporting minoritized students, providing them with voice, giving them voice and providing support for them. And while I think the other work is still really important, I think this past 1.5 years has really given me perspective to really think about supporting those who have been affected. And so my research has really moved towards thinking about, what are their experiences? How do I learn from them and provide support for populations that don't have that support, that are experiencing all of these injustices? And so that's definitely how I've changed over this past 1.5 years.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fisher. Dr. Fields-Smith.
So I too have had a shift in thinking. 1 year ago, I was doing a study on homeschooling as a pathway to healing for African-American families. I had to change from my plan because of the pandemic. I was going to do face-to-face sister circles, which are a culturally relevant way of doing a focus group. And I had to do them online. And I really struggled with that, because if you know anything about sister circles, it really involves that context of being together around a table. Usually there's food, we're breaking bread together. I can't do all those things online. And I wondered, how can I capture that virtually? There was nothing written at all about using that methodology online. And so I chartering a course, I guess I should say, just started thinking about, well, what would be important? And what I've come to realize in analyzing that data is, even though we were online, we experienced Black joy, we bonded. I have a research assistant working with me who was not part of the data collection, only the analysis. And she's constantly saying to me, she feels like she's intruding on a sacred space. And I'm so amazed that she sees that as an outsider, because so we created this space. And then listening to the voices of those home educators, who many of them saying that they don't get to talk to other Black home educators. So this was such a special thing for them. And I was speaking to someone last night that was on one of the sister circles this summer, and she still brought it up, how wonderful it is and the connections that were made. And so I've begun to realize research methodology can contribute to healing. And it's a powerful thing. And so I'm writing about that now. And the other thing that I've been pushed to, in fall 2020, last semester, I had to teach my first asynchronous class online. And I missed my students. I missed their voices. So this semester I'm teaching another one, different course, but I really pushed myself. How can I create connection with these folks? Because that's what teaching is. We're creating a classroom community. We shouldn't feel like you're out here alone. So it's an issues and trends class, issues and trends in education. And what we're doing is we're using the technology to create an online limited edition newspaper that actually has an audience. I send it to my other class and other people have asked for it. And so we're on our second edition, and it's exciting work. They're able to collaborate. So just thinking about this online environment, it doesn't have to be depressing, and it can be really engaging. So so I've really shifted in my teaching and my research.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fields-Smith. It makes me want to take your class. And Dr. Blissett, would you like to contribute?
Yeah, in terms of how we've been changing the way we think about our role. So, I mean, first of all, I'm new here to UGA. So part of my thinking over the past year and a half was how I was going to move. But beyond that, we've had all of these other things that have been happening, which again, as have been said by others, like have happened over the past year, but have been happening for a while. And I think particularly as a member of a minoritized group, I think when you're in this field, you can often feel like it is your responsibility to kind of handle everything. And for that matter, many people see it as your responsibility. So, for all of us who are teaching students of all different levels, they would show up in my office, even if they weren't my students, right? And it was one of those things that I wasn't like thrilled about, but I was willing to kind of think about as I have to kind of pick up every piece. And what I've started to realize, particularly as I've kind of moved out of what I've in the past been called as dysfunctionally independent, is that there is a community of people that are all working on different parts of this problem, and that being able to engage with that network does lessen the burden on individuals, if you can start to realize this. And that for me, realizing that, particularly now that I'm engaging more with a broader community, that there are things that I can feel comfortable with others handling, and then there are things that I know I'm good at, right? And so kind of to the point that I've made before, identifying like, well, what's the thing that I am particularly more useful at within this space, and really spending my time and energy there to be able to do that well. That all said, the other thing that comes with participating in this network that I've been thinking a lot about is now having a lot more kind of intergenerational experience and conversation than I used to about how this work works. You know, historically, I've worked with people who are kind of at my same career level and all of that. And realizing that there are some things that we also have to be aware of, and that I've not previously been thinking about, including the fact that it gets old and it gets hard, and that we have witnessed a lot of people burn out of doing justice work because they have been the ones that everyone kind of relied on to do that work without putting in the effort. And so I have been thinking a lot about like rethinking my previous approach, which was this very like horizontal organization, communitarian approach to justice, to say like, but what is also the practical way to make sure that we can actually take care of the people that are trying to do the work and not, you know, abusing their generosity, such that we can keep up the energy and then empower others to also be involved. So I think the network thing and all of that, that's kind of where I am now, previous to where I've been in the past.
Thank you so much for that perspective. And Dr. Burke, would you like to share a little bit about how your role has changed in the last?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. I've had the good fortune to teach a course over the course of the last 5 years with Ruth Harmon and with a woman named Callan Steinman, who's at the Georgia Museum of Art. And it's a Y-PAR course and it's a methods course. And essentially the idea is what can happen in terms of community change when we give youth multiple artistic affordances to think with co-researchers about what they might want to advocate for. And so we've run that through Camp Dive, which was a partnership with the College of Ed and Clark County. And then we ran it through the Parkview Literacy Center, which we used to have. And then the last year we ran it with Cedar Shoals, but then with a broader kind of older group of students through Clark County. But we usually do it in the museum. And so it was a bit of a logistical nightmare because it was about how do you transport people to the museum? Because as you know, campus is not a particularly friendly place for communities of color, local communities of color, and certainly there are social class issues that overlap in that area as well. And so the opportunity this past summer was to be able to bring the art to the students. And so we were able to deliver art boxes, which was essentially like, let's give you everything you might want to create with this summer around the questions we might ask. And then we meet in virtual spaces to think together. And I have to say that the projects that came out of that in the midst of the pandemic, in the midst of riots around state murder of African Americans were deeply powerful and beautiful and heart-wrenching. And so I'm thinking about what Cheryl is talking about, because we just had Tim San Pedro just give a talk in relation to this, and he talks about sacred truth spaces, and particularly emerging from indigenous research methodologies. And I don't know that we could claim that what we had was a sacred truth space, but certainly the products that these youth came to would suggest that they needed those spaces in order to process what was going on. And so I think that there is really interesting stuff to the idea of like, hey, let's just flood kids with artistic resources and ask them complex questions and then scaffold it in such a way that they can engage however they want to engage. And there will be failures there, and it's really, really messy because it always is, but also we end up stumbling towards profundity often enough.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Burke. And before we move into a Q&A session with the audience, we have one final question for the panel. Those of us here at UGA have lots of roles in the community and the institution and in the college. We are students, service workers, administrative staff, researchers, human resource professionals, faculty members, instructors, administrators, education advocates, and more. Can you share strategies or recommendations that all of us can consider as we reflect on the best way to contribute to social change efforts that advance equity, liberation, and collective healing? And we can start off with Dr. Field Smith.
I love this question. My one strategy would be to follow your righteous rage. Righteous because it's on behalf of someone else and not yourself. I became just enraged the day after the riot at the Capitol. I reached out to some students that were now teaching in classrooms, and I asked them, what was it like to teach January 7th? And a student described a situation right here in Athens, 5th grade, 10-year-olds who didn't want to say the pledge because their country did not like them, value them simply because of their skin color. These were Black and brown children. And they also said, what's the point? What's the point of anything if my country just doesn't like me? These kids were aware of the difference between the response to the Capitol siege and the Black Lives Matter movement in the summer. Only 10 years old on the planet, and they've already been traumatized by the color of their skin, or by people's reactions to the color of their skin, I should say. And I followed my righteous rage. I asked faculty in my department to come together with me, and some responded. And as a result, on Thursday afternoons, we meet online. And as Kevin said, the magic of art. We have a community artist come, and the first thing that we do is the guidance counselor at the school meets with the kids and gets them to open up to their feelings around something. We did the pandemic, we did the siege at the Capitol, like different things that have happened in their lives. And they talk about it, and the adults model it, responding to whatever the quick activity is. And then the artist comes. The first artist was Brandon Sadler, who, if you saw the Black Panther movie, you saw his work. We were all excited about that. Wow, where do we go from here? But one of the things we've discovered is the kids have also discovered that art is peaceful. I can express myself through art. The adults look forward to it. Thursday afternoons, I have my art supplies right here. I can't wait. And I'm not an artist, but through the art, we're starting something. I don't know where it's going to go, but because I followed my righteous rage and I wouldn't let it go, something wonderful is happening. And I couldn't have planned it. So my strategy, what I would want everybody to do is, if something really makes you mad and it's on behalf of someone else, not the anger for yourself, follow it and just let it lead you to just be open, be open to what can happen.
Thank you so much. That was so powerful. Thank you for sharing, Dr. Field Smith. Dr. Blissett, would you like to add?
Yeah, I mean, the question about the one best thing to do to contribute, I mean, I don't know if there is one best way. My answer would be to contribute at all, right? I think, and to kind of what I said before, what that looks like could be a variety of things. And so when it comes to like my concrete advice, I have one piece of advice with 2 levels of implication. And my advice is write it down. I think when you're talking about an individual level, if you're thinking about like, what can I personally do? Look around you to all the resources that are available and make a commitment to doing something, to participating in one or more of these things. I think we often think that we don't know what to do, but if you just slow down a little bit and look around, you actually find there's a lot to do, right? And there are a lot of places to plug in. And so write it down. I'm not a Pinterest person, but make a mood board, right? If you have to, right? Like, but something to say that part of how I am going to be developing who I am as a person is that this is part of the work that I do, is contributing in some ways. Because we all learned in what, like 3rd grade probably, that, identifying the problem is the first step of problem solving, but it's not the last step. You have to do more than that, right? And so, sure, go read White Fragility and then figure out where you can actually help, right? And I'm not necessarily endorsing that book in particular, but just using that as an example of, like how people are often trying to educate themselves, which I think is good, but what else now? What else are you actually going to do to help the people around you, kind of to the points that were being made before? And then the other implication for writing it down is also for organizations. I think a lot of organizations treat justice stuff in this very like, what is the immediate thing we can do to make this all not feel so bad thing? And certainly like the care for ourselves and our communities is really, really important. But communities and organizations can think about justice in a strategic way too, to say like, what are our goals and how are we going to get there in a more intentional way, rather than kind of like what is kind of the one-off thing that we can choose to do that will fix all of our issues, right? Like, so again, writing it down applies to organizations too, to say like, what is your plan? What is your goal? Who are you trying to be, to incorporate within yourselves and the people who are within your organization? This is who we are. And if you are a part of this organization, it means being on board with like justice as a goal, because we are, aligned with justice. So writing it down for you as an individual, but also for you as a person of a group.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Blissett. And Dr. Burke, would you like to share your recommendations?
Yeah, I'm going to steal. I don't really have any of my own original ideas, so I'm going to steal from my Aunt Maria Whelan. Died early in the pandemic. She was not a COVID-19 casualty directly, but she was indirectly. And so anyways, Maria, she's the kind of family member who's just your aunt until you realize what she does, and they're like, oh my God. And she ran for years Illinois Action for Children, which is essentially the advocacy organization, and does all the distribution of money for early childhood education in the state of Illinois. So she was an advocate for mothers and for kids for years and years and years. But she started every meeting and every time we hung out at families with a question, which was, what's the scuttlebutt? And essentially it was like, what should we gossip about? And I think about that in relation to like the work that we do with youth, because the first 15, 20 minutes are about building relationships, and it's about, the Deep Center, they call it joy bringers, but it's like, what should we talk about to get about what we really need to talk about? And so what's going on in your life? What's important? What are you scared of? What are you worried about? What brings you joy? So it is often very uncomfortable for people who are introverts, and it can feel like forced camaraderie, but the notion is like, we're humans. We need to figure out what really matters to each other, and then we can move on. So I'd say, what's the scuttlebutt?
I love that. Thank you so much, Dr. Burke. And Dr. Fisher, what recommendations can you share with us today?
So I echo everything that has been said before me. And I guess my recommendation is similar to Righteous Rage. I think working in educational settings, there is a propensity to try to make other adults happy at the expense of what's happening for families and for kids. And so my recommendation is, don't be afraid to hurt adult feelings or to confront other adults when you see that there's some sort of injustice that's happening. And this could be for folks, whether it's a person in your family, whether it's a teacher that you are seeing is, referring the same kids, and all the kids are referring are, for disciplinary action, or Black and brown kids. Don't be afraid to say something. And I know a lot of people get uncomfortable trying to have these sort of conversations with other people. They don't want to mess up the status quo, but that's why we're in the position that we are in now. It's because we see things that we know are not okay, and in an effort not to cause a wave or a ripple, we sort of let them slide. And so what we need to do is to be courageous and to, in a thoughtful and non-disrespectful way, sort of confront these systems or things that you see, to be able to help make change. So that's what my suggestion is to sort of lean into those feelings of discomfort around these difficult conversations, or addressing folks in your family who may have said things, or a teacher that may be engaging in the same discriminatory practices. Lean into that discomfort. That means you're learning, you're growing. And like Dr. Field Smith says, you're engaging in this righteous rage, right? You're advocating on behalf of someone else. And so what you're doing is righteous. And you should feel strength in knowing that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fisher. And thank you all for sharing. I personally have learned a lot from your responses today, so really appreciative for the opportunity to moderate. I do want to leave some time for some attendee questions. We have a few that have been submitted. One person is excited about the potential opportunity to read the newsletter that was referred to earlier in the session. Maybe we can connect that individual with the DEI office with those resources. The next question that was submitted, and those attendees who haven't submitted questions are welcome to go ahead and submit them. But this one in particular was submitted by a deaf person and a deaf educator. And they have to ask, we often see the struggles with the lack of language equality as many deaf, hard of hearing children of all races face with online learning, when really need interaction to allow use of American Sign Language. How would you recommend us to meet their needs when struggle is happening and many American or children that are deaf and hard of hearing are facing struggles with online learning? I hope I read that correctly. Online learning is mostly done in English text and speaking. When with these deaf children hard of hearing, we need more visual approach. Many of those children are people of color, and it kills me to watch the struggles and wanting to find best solution, and it's hard these days. Do any of our panelists have something to contribute to students who might be hard of hearing in this virtual learning environment?
So acknowledging that my field is not in special education, and I have colleagues who will better answer the question. My general answer around student need in relation to issues of equity is that we need to robustly not only follow the law, which is often not happening, and I would imagine that there will be legal cases that emerge out of the ways in which online learning has disenfranchised people who are entitled to resources. But I think the other issue is that in the ways that my colleagues were talking about earlier, we need broad-based advocacy efforts that don't just emerge from communities of people who are affected. And so this has to be coalitional work. And so my initial argument would be that the University of Georgia has an organization and has a department that has both expertise and connections. And I would encourage you to use us as a resource to advocate for this kind of work, because the public service plank at the University of Georgia is vital to providing the kinds of social change that will get us in the direction of equity. So that's circling around the specifics of the question, but I would say that we have the resources, and we can either connect you with the people who might be able to help, or you can find them yourself on the website.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burke. Does anybody else have anything to add in line with that question? There hasn't been any additional questions submitted by the attendees, and we're just about out of time. Is there anything anyone wants to add before we turn it over to Dr. Higgins for our closing? Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate all of your time, and thank you to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office for coordinating this great event. I have learned so much, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity. So Dr. Higgins, looks like we're about at 11 o'clock. I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Dana, and also to our panelists. I appreciate you being here today with us and sharing your perspectives on how we can move in a direction that will benefit education, that will address the systems that you all named, and that will also lead to us playing a role of advocacy. I heard that as one of the themes here that several of you talked about in ways in which you are advocating for youth, and also thinking about how do we transform our classroom, even the classrooms that we are engaged in as faculty members, but also in the different education systems. So thank you so much for your thoughts today. I also want to just take some time to reflect on the conference and our time together, and just thinking about everything that has been shared this over the last couple of days. I wanted to say over the last couple of weeks. It has felt like a week already. But there's several moments of reflection. I'm grateful for Mary Frances Early being a part of our opening session and just reminding us of her courage and the significance of diversity, equity, and inclusion during her time as a student and today on our campus. I also felt encouraged by Dr. Dillard as she talked to us about remembering and the value of remembering in order to be the educator that Black students deserve and that all students need. Each of the sessions I attended were filled with knowledge sharing on practices to transform the way in which we teach, learn, and grow individually and collectively. The panels were insightful and thought provoking, as you saw this morning with our panel. The high school students clearly communicated their voices are necessary in this moment and that we need to make space for them and to listen to them. It has been a wonderful conference, and it would not be possible without your contributions. So I want to again thank the DEI Conference Planning Committee, our speakers, presenters, the panelists, moderators, and the staff that are providing our technology and registration support. I hope you all are feeling full of possibilities, connections, joy, and inspiration. I encourage you to continue the conversations beyond our time together today and the past few days. And I hope that you will take the necessary action to respond to the challenging moments of our time. So, again, thank you for your presence. And I hope that each of you will continue to have a good day, a good rest of the week. And please remain connected to the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. We would love to continue this work with you. So, thank you again and have a great day.